Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to continue our trade guide series here on the channel. In today's video, we are covering the Utah Jazz, a team that has been very highly requested. I'm really excited to be diving into them here in the end of January, leading up to the 2025 NBA trade deadline. If you guys are excited, you know what to do. Hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's jump into the video preview here now. We're going to first talk about a very recent Utah Jazz trade, one that they made with the Phoenix Suns. That is how we're going to kick off today's video. After that, we'll look at their overall collection of future first-round draft picks, a very bountiful collection, I might add. Then we'll look at the long-term plan and trajectory, and specifically talk about how the Jazz have multiple different layers in their long-term plan. I think something that has been very under-discussed in the NBA so far, and I think the long-term front office planning behind Justin Zanuck and Danny Ainge has been very secretive, but also very creative long term, and I'm very excited for what the future holds for the Utah Jazz. And if you're a Jazz fan, you should be as well. Comment "Go Jazz" down below if you're excited. Also, we're going to talk about trade likely veterans. The Jazz at this point in time still remain to be sellers at the 2025 NBA trade deadline. They've been playing a ton of their young up-and-coming talent this year. As a result of that, they are very well positioned for the 2025 draft and are also in a spot where trading some veterans like they've done the last couple of years, whether it be Mike Conley or Kelly Olynyk or Jared Vanderbilt, Malik Beasley. There's been so many examples over the last couple of years of the Jazz making trades at the deadline. They're going to probably follow suit and continue to do that this trade deadline, if I had to guess. And then when it comes to projected activity level, how often do I think the Jazz will be making, placing, taking calls at the 2025 deadline? And reminder, this is a super important reminder, I want everyone to hear this. I will be live on the channel the entire week of the trade deadline. That has become an annual routine here at Utility Sports. The entire week of the NBA trade deadline, I will be live for hours and hours and hours on end. And I want to know, are you guys going to be there or not? Comment right now down in the comment section below. I'll be there if you're planning on participating and attending those live streams this year. It's always a huge hit. I love hearing your guys' voice. You guys obviously get to have your comments up on screen. It's just a great time. So if you're new, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that. And then also, if you've been there, done that before, looking forward to having you again this year. So let's talk about the recent trade, the one with the Phoenix Suns. The Jazz traded 3 first-round picks for 1 first-round pick. And the sticker shock there might have surprised a ton of people, saying, whoa, the Phoenix Suns turned 1 first into 3 first. That's clever GM work. And for the Suns' current situation, you could argue that it is, because that 2031 first, well, I think it's an extremely valuable asset. Not every GM around the league would have had real interest in acquiring that pick because of how far out that pick really is. And not every GM, not every executive has the shelf life to stick around for that duration of time. But I think Utah specifically, a team that has, I think, a real core infrastructure in their front office that has real staying power there in Utah. Justin Zanuck obviously has been doing a tremendous job overseeing part of this rebuild. He executed the Donovan Mitchell trade. He was a large factor in the Rudy Gobert trade as well. I think they got very good value for both of those players. Now, it doesn't mean the Cavs and Wolves didn't win those trades or come out very well on the back end of them either, but the Jazz got what they were really looking for, which was a boatload of draft picks from both teams. And obviously, Danny Ainge is one of the most well-known executives in league history. His staying power is unquestioned there in Utah. So for Utah specifically, the reason they turned 3 first-round picks into 1, and I think the Jazz brass really articulated this well, the 3 first-round picks that they traded had a 0% chance of ever being the first overall pick. The one that they got from Phoenix has a legitimate shot at being the first overall selection. Now, it's a long time away, 2031. We might have to start scouting some 6th and 7th graders right now in middle school. But the entire point of this really centers around the fact that the Jazz are trying to maintain their trade value long term. They're trying to increase the value of specific draft picks and trading the least favorable of the Cavs Wolves picks, and then in 27 and 29 including their own pick in that, as well as potentially the least favorable of the 3. There's really zero risk long term for Utah, and there's a ton of long term risk for Phoenix depending on their future roster moves and what other decisions they end up making. The Jazz are in a spot now where they're probably trading 3 picks in the 20s for a legitimate shot, potentially at worst, maybe a top 10 pick or a lottery pick. And when you're in the lottery, there's a chance. And even if you don't win that chance, you still have a valuable pick that you could use in either another trade or to draft in the lottery potentially at that point in time. Here is a collection of their future first-round picks. This graphic is from Bobby Marks of ESPN, so huge shout out to him. I actually just grabbed this from his Twitter because I thought it was very, very clear and well articulated. And it's just a quick little look at what the Jazz actually have to work with. Of course, 2 first-round picks now in 25, 1 first-round pick in 2026. Now, their own first in 25 and 26 does have some stipulations on it from a previous trade with Oklahoma City. Now in 2027, they have 3 first-round picks, 2 first-round picks in 2029, 1 first-round pick in 2030, which is their own, and now 2 first-round picks in 2031. So a real collection of future first-round draft picks. 6 over the next 3 years, 1 in 2028. You're just looking at a very significant amount here. In fact, it's like 11 or 12 first-round picks over the next 7 years, which is a very, very good dosage to work with for sure. So when it comes to their trajectory and plan, obviously some of it centers around the 2025 draft. The Jazz are in a premium position here to grab star talent, potentially, in someone like Cooper Flagg and Ace Bailey. Now you might be wondering, why do I see Damian Lillard on the graphic? What does he have to do with the current Utah Jazz plan? And this kind of goes back to when Damian Lillard was on the trade block, hypothetically, if you will, when the Portland Trailblazers were going to really discover ways to trade him and look through certain packages, ultimately trading him to Milwaukee. The Jazz were a dark horse sleeper team in those discussions, and that was reported on heavily. And at the time, I was kind of dismissive of that because I did not expect the Jazz to be a real buyer at that point in time. And I maintained that point of view the entire duration of the Damian Lillard saga, and I was ultimately correct. The Utah Jazz did not trade for Damian Lillard. However, I do think there is one important thing we can learn from even reported interest at that point in time. Even though I thought the Jazz were not ready at that point in time to really contend or compete, ultimately the Jazz internally seemed to view that as the same perspective I had. But what we know is Danny Ainge, Justin Zanuck, and the Utah Jazz brass are going to look for win-now upgrades, win-now opportunities if they become presented to them, if they become something that could make sense around Lauri Markkanen. And I think there are a few different possibilities moving forward where star players might become available in the Jazz as they accumulate top-end draft picks like they will in 2025. The roster is not going to be too barren to try and contend or compete. If you have a core of Lauri Markkanen plus Cooper Flagg plus a couple of their other young guys, and then you're able to internally add to your roster by making an external trade for a star player like a Damian Lillard, that caliber of player, we might be able to see the Utah Jazz quickly spring forward from this young, fun team to a serious contending team. Kind of think about the way the Houston Rockets have been able to upgrade their roster, going out and signing guys like Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks. The Utah Jazz might be able to supersize that, where they have some of those young draft picks like how Houston has gotten Amen Thompson and how they got Jabari Smith Jr. and Jalen Green. The Jazz have the collection of draft picks to make pretty much any trade in the league that they possibly could want in the future. If Giannis were to become available, if Devin Booker becomes available, the Jazz could be a reported team for any of those types of players. And they're also in a situation where trading for a player isn't just putting them next to Lauri Markkanen, it's putting them next to Lauri Markkanen plus their top pick in 2025, plus their top pick in 2026, plus Cody Williams as he develops, plus Isaiah Collier if he really continues to grow and develop and blossom as a player, plus Keontae George. And that's where you see the allure long-term for Utah, because the trajectory and the plan, I think, are long-term in alignment with each other to not just take off, but take off to a point where they're better than those Gobert and Mitchell teams ever were, with a more congruent roster and a roster with more top-end talent from the point guard through the center spot in your starting lineup. And I think the Jazz will be capable of figuring that out at some point in time. So when it comes to trade likely veterans, there's a few that are worth mentioning here for sure. We're going to start with the vets specifically. John Collins, someone who has a 1+1 deal making a little bit over $26 million annually. His $53.2 million guaranteed over the next 2 years, if he does opt into that player option, I think could be an intriguing number for a lot of different teams. Now, it's important to note, at the time I'm recording this, there has not been a trade of a player yet making more than $20 million this season. We've seen a bunch of smaller contracts getting traded. Dorian Finney-Smith, Dennis Schroeder, Nick Richards as examples of that. the new CBA, the new rules and restrictions in the CBA that will really kind of change the way the NBA operates, especially as a trade machine. The NBA teams are a little hesitant to trade for those bigger contracts, but this is where the Jazz could really swoop in. A contract like John Collins with the salary matching rules could become really, really pivotal and essential for a team to maybe include or utilize Utah in a trade to help facilitate a trade between three teams. If you're trying to get certain salary out the door without taking certain kind of salary back in, John Collins might be that healthy medium, and I think that's where we could see Utah really be willing to jump in. Collins has had a good year for himself. Not only is he a salary matching component in a trade, but teams could look at him as an actual value piece as well. The Jazz got him for so dirt cheap from Atlanta a few years ago, and I think the return on investment there is going to end up being pretty good for Utah with how things have aged and how he's been playing this season. Colin Sexton might be one of the more sought-after players in the NBA. You see him on the graphic here with an Orlando Magic jersey. I think he could make a ton of sense there. But Young Bull also could make a lot of sense in Detroit, a team that has cap space right now. Matching contracts isn't necessarily essential. The Pistons would have to send just a little bit of salary back, but not very much, to facilitate a trade with the Utah Jazz. So I think there's going to be a plentiful amount of suitors for Colin Sexton. Guards who can defend up and down the lineup a little bit, kind of bring that intensity every single night, something Sexton does very, very well. You know, I always think back to his college game against the U of M Golden Gophers and the 3-on-5, and they almost won the game. Like, just crazy, just honestly insane stuff. So I always think back to that. It's one of the craziest moments in college basketball history, honestly. And Sexton was right at the center of that kind of game. And I think that's been a pretty good indicator of what his career is going to end up looking like. Someone who can compete on both ends of the floor, has significant offensive talent, and is able to put the ball in the hoop and put the ball in the deck and make plays off of that as well. And I think for Utah, they might be able to cash in on him at the trade deadline this season. Then we'll talk about Jordan Clarkson, a player who, listen, he's past his prime in my opinion. He's past his peak value. And the number of fights he's tried to get in the last year or two has been pretty funny as well. But I do think Clarkson's still a player that can help a team, help a contending team. Now, if you talk about this archetype of player, a combo guard who probably thrives with the ball in his hands a little bit more so than without it, it's hard to see this player being a perfect fit on contending teams, honestly. Like, you think about how heliocentric some of the top-end teams are. You think about, OKC, the ball's going to be in Shea's hands a lot. You think about Denver, the ball's going to be in Nikola Jokic's hands a lot. You think about Dallas, the ball will be in Luka's hands. Obviously, the Celtics beat teams off a driving kick, but when the game gets tight, it goes to Jason Tatum. Like, Clarkson's not the easiest fit around some of those players. Now, there's talent here. I could see a team being interested in buying in on him, but I don't think the value is going to be super great in return, and I think Jazz fans are at a point where you guys have accepted that kind of as reality. Drew Eubanks, I threw him in here on the graphic because I think his non-guarantee next season, $5 million this year, makes him kind of an interesting expiring contract, middle-sized contract, and really the lower-end mid-sized contract that I could see teams being okay with including into a deal. Again, just like we talked about with John Collins, having salary that is either expiring or nearly expiring becomes very, very essential to kind of navigate and facilitate trades at the trade deadline. And now for one of the biggest questions, since the Utah Jazz by rule cannot trade Lauri Markkanen this trade deadline, the real question stems to Walker Kessler, who has been having a much better season again this year. I think if you go back a couple of years, his involvement with Team USA and the World Cup, I think honestly just kind of set him up for a poor sophomore season in a lot of ways. But this year we've seen him kind of come back and return to form from what we saw his season look like as a rookie, where he was a high impact rim protector. Now, I do think his involvement offensively will really rely on long-term development from the guard play, specifically in Utah. There's been flashes from Isaiah Collier. There's been flashes from Keontae George. I still think there's a lot of room to grow for the Jazz and their backcourt specifically, and the utilization of their offensive front court, because Walker Kessler is not the most offensively skilled player in the league, but he is a good screen setter, kind of a unique roller. He has a little bit of touch into his game, and of course just enormous size in a way that can provide real added rim pressure around guard play. So there's tools to work with here for Walker Kessler and the Jazz if they want to look at a long-term partnership together. But given the amount of reports and rumors about a potential Walker Kessler trade over the last couple of years, I don't want to rule anything out here, specifically centered around Walker Kessler being traded for draft equity at the 2025 NBA trade deadline. I think part of the reason Walker Kessler is such a sought-after player right now, he's on a rookie contract, and since he was such a late first-round pick, all things considered, he was a pick in the 20s by the Minnesota Timberwolves. Walker Kessler is on a very cheap rookie contract. He's not one of those $12 million a year rookies. He's one of those guys making less than $7-8 million a year. So with that in mind, it's very easy for contending teams with salary restrictions, salary limitations, to get to a money mark here for Walker Kessler. And I think with that in mind, it's very possible we do see him get traded. Someone like the Los Angeles Lakers would be very heavily interested. The New York Knicks could be a unique team. Obviously, there's been reported interest there. Mitchell Robinson's a unique contract for them to trade. That would be probably some type of 3-team trade. Now, the Knicks are a little asset thin after making the trades that they've made for Mikal Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns. So I don't fully expect a trade to materialize there. The Lakers, I think, with Anthony Davis's recent push for really wanting an upgrade into their starting lineup and specifically a center to play alongside of, Walker Kessler is a player who I think could make a ton of sense while still giving the Lakers lineup versatility of when Walker Kessler is not playing 36 minutes a game, which is probably most of the time for the Lakers anyway. You could see Anthony Davis maybe slot in at the 5 when Kessler's out of the game, and then playing some 4 next to Kessler for extended periods of time as well. This is the kind of player I think would make a ton of sense for the Lakers. Now, there's other teams around the league that do have serious needs for their front court long term. Kessler, obviously, we know the Timberwolves really liked him enough to draft him in the first round a couple of years ago. The Wolves have some questions to answer right now with their current team. There's a bunch of teams around the league. The Milwaukee Bucks could be a team I would see really having a lot of interest in Walker Kessler, and the Jazz, with their accumulation of assets and their desire to continue stockpiling draft picks moving forward, would they be willing to sell out on Walker Kessler? Yes or no? I want to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below. I don't want to rule it out at this point. Now, when there's smoke, there's usually fire, but there's been smoke for a while. So, this is something where I think a lot of teams want Walker Kessler for all the reasons I've already listed. And I think the Jazz are willing to listen to offers, but they're not completely motivated to move him. It's not like they feel pressure or the clock ticking on them to trade him. He's a player who I think going forward is just going to be on a value contract for a little while here. Someone who, even when he does get extended at some point in time, probably won't be that ridiculous of a contract either. So with all things considered there, I think the Jazz don't really feel a lot of pressure to move him. But if they are very impressed with an offer and feel like the long-term upside of the picks they get in return, cough, cough, Lakers, for example, that could be something that I think seriously makes a ton of sense. So when it comes to the projected activity level here for the Utah Jazz, I expect Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck to be like the call room in The Wolf of Wall Street, where the phones are ringing right at 9:30, everyone's placing calls, and I expect the Jazz to be very, very active this trade deadline because of a few reasons. First of all, they have the veteran pieces. We talked about the John Collins, the Colin Sextons of the world. We talked about Jordan Clarkson. We talked even about Drew Eubanks. They have that combination of contract flexibility. They have the combination of talented veterans that could be worth actually trading for contending teams. They have those two things together, and that combination is such a valuable tool at the trade deadline because they can make trades to help teams out salary reasons, or they can make trades to help teams out win games. And both things are very, very valuable for teams either trying to contend, win playoff series, or for teams trying to dip below the tax or to help their long-term cap sheet a bit. The Jazz are in a position to help a bunch of different teams in a variety of different ways, and I think that's what makes them such a unique trade team at this trade deadline. And then we also know Danny Ainge likes to make trades. He typically comes out very, very well when he makes trades, and his long-term track record suggests he's going to probably make trades this trade deadline as well. Walker Kessler, of course, is the big fish in theory from them. Since Lauri Markkanen cannot be traded, if Lauri Markkanen could be traded, all hell would be breaking loose right now in Utah. Luckily, that's not the case for them this year with his extension in place, but the Jazz are still a hot button team to watch for at the 2025 NBA trade deadline, if I had to guess. Thank you all so much for watching. Really do appreciate you guys a ton. Don't forget, we have those trade deadline live streams coming soon on the channel. Make sure to stay tuned for those. Hit that like button, subscribe if you did enjoy, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.